Listen in, it's UnCan with UCAN. You just gotta plant a seed and lend a helping hand. Grow communities with just one seed at a time. Blooming leaves in the full city, the sun will shine.
Hello and welcome to the Catawba Trail Farm. My name is Mike Nye. I'm one of the board members here at UCAN and a volunteer here at the farm. I am joined by some special guests today.
Kofi Boone, I teach at NC State University in landscape architecture.
Delphine Sellars, co-founder and executive director of Urban Community AgriNomics, better known as UCAN.
And I'm Brian McAdoo. I'm professor of Earth and Climate Sciences at Duke University.
So today we're going to talk about our gravesite project that we have going on at the Catawba Trail Farm. We are partnering up with NC State University and Duke University in this project. I'd like to go ahead and ask our special guest some questions. Dr. McAdoo, I'd like to ask you, when you initially came out here, what was it that you saw in this part of the land that made you want to research this property?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Mike. This has been a really fascinating journey we've been on here. When I found out that you guys were doing this work out here and you mentioned there was this register of one of the original landowners, I wanted to come out and see it. You were working on conserving that. I'd like to hear more about that, hopefully. But then I was walking around out here on the site. You can see this beautiful site out here. I noticed some things that were kind of odd. There are these rocks about this big that were kind of half buried in the soil in this area around the gravesite of the register of William Johnson, the original landowner here. And they're unusual because we're sitting up here on a terrace. It's above the little river, which drops down maybe about 10 meters off to this direction. And it's geologically impossible for rocks of that size to be here. So I kind of said, that's interesting. So I started walking over this whole area you see around us here, and I noticed maybe 30 or 40 of these rocks about this big that are half buried in the ground. And I said, this is something unusual here, that they're kind of here and associated with the register you guys found. So that got our curiosity going and started thinking about how can we explore this a little bit more.
And with that register you're talking about, Delphine, could you talk more about what this register means and what this area of this property means?
Sure. When we first acquired access to this property, actually looking at the baseline report that was done in 2008, it indicated that there was a William Johnston and his family were buried on this property. And then, believe it or not, probably less than or more than a month later, I received a call from the Alvarez's family out in out west, and they began to tell me that their relative William Johnston was buried on this property, and they thought it was just a shame that nobody paid attention to the fact that here in Durham County was the oldest marked gravesite, and there was no recognition available for it. Nobody knew about it. So with further conversation, we decided with their help that we were going to restore this ledger, and then from there, see what we can do to get some recognition that here on this property, which is known as Snow Hill 4, is the oldest marked gravesite in Durham County. So it's William Johnston, his wife, and 4 of their children.
And if I can say, he was buried out here with his wife and 4 of his children is what got me thinking about where are those other burial grounds? Where are the actual burials taking place?
I wonder, and my goal is to do communicate with the family to get back with them. I think we're living in a different kind of time now where people sometimes are reluctant to share all that they know, and so I'm hoping now that they're a little bit more at ease in speaking with us and giving us more information. So we haven't completely skipped over that chapter yet because obviously they're not here. And William Johnson had anticipated, based on my knowledge, even in his will, for this to be a cemetery for his family. He set aside an acre of land, I believe, so that all of his family could be entombed in the same area. So there's a lot more history there.
And as we learn more about this property, we do know that he requested an acre plot of land. Again, he was hoping that his extended family could be buried out here, but unfortunately, most of his children die very young. And we still have this acre piece of land on this property. It being Snow Hill Plantation, it eventually turns into Stagville Plantation, and this property is continued to be used. When I came out here with Dr. Brian McAdoo, as he talked about, he noticed some rocks. And with those rocks, what was it about those rocks that made you think we needed extra technology to continue researching this land?
It was quite interesting because I just happened to be out here with a group of students from Duke University, and we're just kind of walking around. The more we walked, the more of these rocks we discovered. And the time, this has been cleared out here a little bit, but there are a lot of downed trees and weeds that had grown up and that sort of thing, so it's really hard to see them. Once you took a close look at them, you could see these rocks were all kind of confined in this area you see in the behind us here. And we said, okay, we got to do a little bit more work. Unfortunately, there's a couple things that make it challenging to do further investigations. One, because the family, you're in touch with the old family, but we don't know who's actually buried under these rocks, if there's anybody buried here. So if we wanted to do any excavations, we actually have to get permission of the family. So what we needed to do is use some kind of non-intrusive way to figure out what can we see underground that we can't see that's underground. So I decided to come out here the following year and do a follow-up survey using geophysical equipment. That would include a LiDAR tool, a ground-penetrating radar, and electrical resistivity tool that helps us understand how the soil's been changed. And the idea is if you take a shovel and you dig a hole, and you take that same dirt and you fill it back in, the properties, the soil properties are going to be different where you filled in that hole than the stuff directly next to it. So all this technology is trying to do is say, where has there been a hole been dug here? And then if we see that, does this fit a pattern with the way we understand how people have been buried over historical times?
I'd like to ask Dr. Boone some questions. What is your involvement in this project, and how have you been involved in the framing of this land?
Well, a few years ago, I heard from Ms. Delphine about interest in sort of a broader vision to help to unite a lot of the individual projects that are happening at Catawba Trail Farm. There was a lot of development happening at that time. And there was a need to kind of coordinate all of that to make sure that, you all were kind of moving forward. So we, with a bunch of students, developed a series of workshops and worked with the UCAN board and talked about, goals and talked about the placement of different elements and timing and how to create essentially a unified sort of vision that could help with fundraising, it could help with development, it could help with a lot of different things. As a part of that, Brian's work was on our radar, and we really wanted to participate to help to interpret this important resource, but also kind of protect it. And so one thing about it was delineating a bit of a boundary around it. In some cases, it's already here. If you go that way, you can tell from the plants and from the slope and from the ground that it's very different, say, the river on this side. And then on this side, if you go this way, it's different as well, because those used to be, areas for row crops and that kind of work. But here you can see, large mature trees, in some cases species that you don't see very often in this region. There was evidence that, there was sort of an investment here. So part of it was delineating the boundary and protecting it from people who might harm it unintentionally, right? So just wandering through the woods and not knowing what's happening, disturbing some of the rocks that Brian talked about. So part of it is doing that. The other part is the interpretive side. So as a part of it, there are two areas that we're working on now, an interpretive area that way that goes into much more detail about the history of the area, some of the important research that Brian and his students have done. So for large groups that may want to come and tour and understand, there's a point where they can have that conversation. And then behind us, more of a memorial garden area, just to kind of pay homage and pay respect to all the ancestors that are here. Right on this edge, we proposed a Descendants Gate. So a way of controlling access to this burial ground so that, in the future, people will be invited in who are either connected to UCAN, Catawba Trail Farm, or who are descendants of this particular kind of place. And it was important to put it on this side because on that side, even in old aerial photographs and maps, there was an old roadbed here. So we think that, it doesn't disturb what's happening here on the ground, but it also brings you in at the midpoint of this acre rather than on one end or the other. So it doesn't privilege one grave site or one burial site over another. It sort of puts you in a position where you're coming into the middle of it and you're acknowledging all of them at the same time. So the two areas, the interpretive areas, the boundary and the interpretation for it are what we've been working on.
And can you talk a little bit more about how this project will help educate the public and how it will involve the community here in Durham?
Yeah, I think that it's significant. I mean, as Delphine mentioned, as the oldest gravesite in the county, that makes a huge difference. I think also acknowledging both the owner, the landowner and that family, as well as the unmarked graves of the enslaved African people at the same time, I think is an important sort of reconciliation story that more communities need to participate in. As a part of this work, it's allowed me to get a sense of other parts of the country that are also trying to find ways to protect but also interpret these burial grounds. And this place is really unique because it's in the middle of an area that's producing food, that's teaching children, that's engaged in all kinds of sustainability activities. It's in the midst of a beautiful conservancy with a wonderful landscape. So this place is really unique in terms of, it is a burial ground, but it's a lot more too. So the ability to have people connect to this site as a part of that reconciliation that we still need to do as a society, but also as a thread that can connect them to so many other things. So if they come here because they're interested in, you know, history and memorials and cemeteries, while they're here, they'll discover the food, they'll discover the training programs, they'll discover the sustainability, the river. So it's like a nexus or a connection point of so many things. So it's really important.
And I'd like to ask both of you, what is the importance of having this work being done by your students?
If I may, people from Duke and State, we're not supposed to collaborate together.
That's why we're sitting at opposite ends.
Exactly, but we're good right now as long as you have a little distance here. But it was really a lot of fun actually having our students work together in mapping out the site, putting into a geographic information system, a GIS. And as you can tell, taking these kind of complicated science ideas and interpreting it into something that people can engage with and the children can engage with and the general public can engage with. That's what Kofi and his team do extremely well. So this partnership, this collaboration between a geophysicist and a landscape architect has been really fruitful, I hope, and I can't wait to see how the design comes to fruition and actually see children and middle-aged people and older people out here really getting to learn about this rich history and also maybe learn a little bit about the science along the way.
Is there anything you'd like to add to that?
No, it's great. I think the collaboration has been wonderful. I think that, you know, at our best, we apply a lot of best practices. So the evidence base and the science that Brian and his students excel at, we are hungry for it. We're starving for that kind of information so that we can do things that are relevant and that are grounded, you know, that are really tied to real information. So it's been a great experience.
And the best thing about this collaboration is the beneficiaries are the citizens of Durham County, the citizens of North Carolina. I mean, the people of this state, this world. I mean, where else? And I know there are other places, but here you actually can walk on what we call holy ground on this farm. You see the stones and you may not know who is there, but you know someone is there. So it's an opportunity for, as a Black person, to honor those who were enslaved, to honor those who came before us. As Dr. Boone said, here on this property you can learn about agriculture and gardening, but who passed that knowledge down to us? Those people who are entombed here, those who are buried here. So it's an absolutely wonderful spot in the history to have history that is real to you when our kids come out, when our adults come out, and especially when descendants are of some of the potential of the enslaved that are buried here and are longtime citizens and residents of Durham County. They come out and they talk about who could possibly be buried here, and then they get to talking about their ancestors, and the diversity of those conversations and those people included is just wonderful. It goes right back to our motto of building, at Catawba Trail Farm, we're growing communities one seed at a time, one conversation, one word, one smile, one sharing. So it's an absolutely marvelous place to be, and I'm honored to be here.
And if I can turn a question to the moderator, if you don't mind. One thing that Delphine Sellars mentioned a few times now are the descendants, and how do we know about the descendants of this land? So from my geophysical work and Kofi Boone's research on understanding the landscape here and everything, there's very little chance that the two of us alone can figure out who actually worked this land right here, who the people that might be buried here. Now, Mike, I know you've done some research on the people who worked this land, the enslaved Africans that worked this land. Have you made any links between the Stagville property and the Snow Hill property that you can talk about?
Yes, like I mentioned, this was the site of the first plantation in Orange County, and it was owned by William Johnson. Later, this land became part of what was the larger plantation called Stagville Plantation. And with Stagville Plantation, we have a wonderful collaboration of the North Carolina Historic Site that's still on the plantation. And with their help, we were actually able to have the entire list of people who were enslaved on this property since the beginning of this plantation. With that, we are hoping to connect with descendants of those families and those family members that are still in the city of Durham. And as Delphine mentioned, this project is not only about educating the public, but preserving and memorializing their legacy and the history of this property.
I think that's great because, again, no matter what we can do, I can look at a rock over here and say, yes, there's likely a burial over there, but there's no way that I can tell who exactly is buried there, but we can get a collection of names so that when those people want to come back and connect with the land and the landscape here, they have a way of doing that. So thanks for that work.
And Dr. Boone, can you mention a little bit more about how we will actually be memorializing those families and those names on this site?
Yeah, so some of it is seeding areas and using plantings that people communicate as they associate with birth and death and rebirth. So there'll be some small gardens planted on both ends of this trail that's just off the camera. And on the interpretive garden, we're going to have markers that allow people to connect to those lists. So even out in the field, you can see the list of names of people who were associated with Stagville Plantation at large. Organized, we're still working on the organization of it, but there'll be interpretive elements there where if you want to, you can use your phone, you can use some other device and get access to that archival information. So there'll be markers, there'll be signs, there'll be garden areas, but more specifically, there'll be access to a lot of those names that were already been documented.
And with that being said, Delphine, what do you think is the long-term impact for the community with this project?
Oh, goodness. The long-term impact is a knowledge of history, okay? There's nothing like knowing and who and what this land was. I mean, when I think about it, this was the first plantation. William Johnston created, European who owned this property. So it's going to bring an awareness to how this land was used, who lived on this property, and connect modern day Durham County and individuals with the history that began years ago. So there's a connectivity, I think, that is it. So it will become an educational site, a true educational site. It will become an area where people can come and learn, but it will also be one that brings people together. I think that, to me, is the most powerful part of it, is where we all face our history, we face our past, and we use that to make a better future. I know that sounds very ideological, but I think that will definitely be a part of it. There's a lot of richness here and a lot of things that people did not know about. And as the old saying, knowledge is power, but you'll be surprised how powerful knowledge is when it is held by the people who live within the area.
So Brian, where do you think these rocks came from on this land?
I'm glad you asked that. So to be clear, we see these rocks that are about this big that are half buried in the ground. We believe that these are stones that were placed as markers for burials. And I think at last count we had about 46 rocks we found here on this area. It's about an acre size plot here. So there's maybe 46, maybe less, maybe more. We don't really know, and we may never know that number. But the fascinating thing one of my students discovered last year is these rocks are a certain type of rock that don't exist naturally in this area. The closest place you can find this rock type are about a mile in that direction or a mile in that direction. The little river which runs this direction could not have deposited because these rocks we have here on the site do not exist upstream from here. So the only way that these rocks could have been brought here is if somebody walked a mile in that direction or walked a mile in that direction, brought them back here, and used them to memorialize their loved ones that would have been buried here.
So you might be able to tell that this area that we are standing in is actually zoned off from the public. Delphine, could you talk more about why this area has been roped off?
Yeah, I can. And the reason is marked off is because we believe this to be a grave site. And you really don't want people to dishonor those who are buried here. Prior to knowing and recognizing, prior to all the work that Dr. Boone and Dr. McAdoo have done for us, we just walked the land. And now that we know better, we do better because we consider this to be holy land. This is a grave site. This is a place to be honored. So we've marked it off so that people do not trample on it, do not move any of the stones, and if I may use a word, that we do not desecrate that which is here. So it's our beginning of showing honor to those who were buried here, those who toiled here, those who lived here, those who helped build America, that are entombed here. So we want to make sure we give them proper honor.
And now I'd like to open it to any closing remarks or comments.
Something that struck me, my family and I did a trip up to University of Virginia in Charlottesville area, and we visited Monticello's site. They've done a great job with the landscape architects and historians there to preserve the people that were enslaved on Thomas Jefferson's land there. And when we visited that, I was struck by how that resonated with Dr. Boone's vision of what we have here. But when I saw that site and saw, again, these stones are kind of half buried, they weren't buried in rows like we're used to seeing traditional cemeteries in the United States here, it really chilled me, because it's exactly what we see out here. And to see how that history has been celebrated there, and those links have been made between one of the founding fathers of the country and the enslaved people who worked his land, I think it does give a sense of ownership, and ownership is probably not the best word, but pride and recognizing that we all built this country together. And yes, there are some people who were helping build it against their will, but yet here we are today. And now to understand that history, I think, and under the model that UCAN is developing here, it's really an inclusive model, I think, that makes me feel proud of my history in the state and the history of the landscape here, so that more people actually come out here, enjoy the fresh air, enjoy the fresh vegetables and fruits that come from this land here. And I'm just thankful for the work that you guys are doing here at UCAN. I'm glad to be a part of it.
Yeah, same here. And I think that stewardship is a term we use a lot, as opposed to ownership. But the idea that caring for each other, caring for the land, UCAN is already doing that with people. It's beautiful to see you all do it with nature, and now we're doing it with history. So it's a great thing to be a part of.
Eventually what I hope to see is that one day you will be able to start at Stagville, the historic site, and you see where African Americans worked the land. They were enslaved, and they worked the land and got involved and learned about agriculture and herbs and nature and all those things. But they were doing it not because they wanted to, but because they were forced to. They were enslaved. Then you will walk to Horton Grove, which is another section of that same plantation system, and you're going to see the paths and the trails and all that are named after some of those enslaved individuals. And finally, you're going to come up and you're going to cross the little river. And as you come up what is part of the great Native American trading path, you're going to come to Catawba Trail Farm. And what you're going to see there is a diversity of people, but you also see descendants of the enslaved who are doing what? They are learning and working in agriculture, not because they have to, because they want to, and they know the importance of it and the benefits of it. And there's a sense of pride as far as that legacy of agriculture that was left to us. And it's not just for one race or any particular people, but now it's for everybody, because we know that from the earth comes it all. And without agriculture, we would not be here at this particular point in time. So I am truly blessed and honored to even have been a part of this, a small part of what it takes to make this possible. And I thank you all each for all that you're doing to help us with it.
And with that, I'd like to thank our special guests, Dr. Kofi Boone, Ms. Delphine Sellars, and Dr. Brian McAdoo for joining us today. And thank you for joining us as we discuss our gravesite project and how we are conserving the history of this land at Catawba Trail Farm.
There?
Make her natural.
You just gotta plant a seed and lend a helping hand. Grow communities with just one seed.